You're listening to the Brian Donahue Podcast, a production of Pursuit Friends' online community of Jesus followers, boldly going into the farthest reaches of the galaxy with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Pursuit Friends' online community is a place for Trekkies who love Jesus to talk all things Trek, their faith, and everything in between. Join me and special guests from around the world as we engage in relevant discussions about Trek and Jesus. Let's get ready to fly and boldly go right now. And welcome to the first ever episode of the Brian Donahue Podcast, a podcast of Pursue Friends online community of Jesus followers. I'm your host, Pastor Brian Donahue. You can call me Pastor Brian or just Brian if you like. I don't care. It's all good. We're all friends here, and we're all Trekkies and people who love Jesus. And if you don't love Jesus, maybe you're curious about him. Maybe you're curious about the Bible and about Christianity and faith. And we want to welcome you. We want to invite you into this conversation. And we're going to have a lot of fun talking about Star Trek and Jesus as we engage together in our fandom that is Star Trek, our beloved Star Trek. And today is going to be kind of an introductory episode, really, is I'm going to do something I don't do a lot when it comes to this type of platform. I'm going to talk about myself. I'm going to introduce myself to you because maybe you're familiar with my work on the big sci-fi podcast over on the Trekkies podcast network. Maybe you're familiar with my ministry work online or with Pursuit Friends Church and with my music. But maybe you're, for the first time, even realizing that I'm a pastor. If you followed the Big Sci-Fi podcast, maybe you're aware of that. But yeah, I'm a pastor, and I love Jesus with all of my heart. I grew up in church, grew up with parents who were very active in local ministry, and fell in love with Jesus at a very young age, gave my life to Jesus, which is something we say as Christians when we surrender everything to God. We say, I gave my life, or I was saved, I was born again. This is all lingo that means basically that we are dedicated to Jesus. We are following after him. We are pursuing him. We are living like Jesus did to the best of our ability. And we are reading his teachings daily. We are following all those things. So just by way of explanation, I am first and foremost a Christ follower. I am a follower of Jesus. Then I'm a husband, a dad, I'm a musician, a writer, a podcaster, I'm a pastor, and I love sharing my faith with other people. I love encouraging and teaching others how to do that as well. And so over the course of this podcast, you're going to hear a lot about faith. You're going to hear a lot of my perspective and others' perspectives from the faith community, but also from the Trek community. We're going to have a lot of fans on the show. We're going to feature different segments where we talk about our faith, where we talk about just Trek too, where we're just geeking out and being fans of the latest and greatest Trek of old, you know. And we're going to have a lot of fun doing that. So this podcast, I hope that you are going to be encouraged, you're going to be blessed. I know you're going to be entertained beyond a shadow of a doubt. That is also one of our goals of this podcast, is to lift up your faith, but do it in a way that's entertaining and engaging so that you might one day even invite a friend or two or three or four to listen to the podcast and to engage their faith as well. Pun intended. You're going to get a lot of Star Trek puns throughout this podcast, by the way. And I hope you're okay with it because they're coming. They're coming at you hot and heavy. So, like I said, my name is Brian Donahue. I'm a pastor, and I absolutely love Star Trek. I started watching Star Trek from a very young age, and it was something I did with my dad. And so that's one thing I love about it. I have very good memories of Saturday evenings. And at first it was watching the original Star Trek at like 6 o'clock on local channel 43 out of Cleveland, Ohio, here in Northeast Ohio, WUAB. And watching the original Star Trek. And I remember watching the Next Generation premiere episode. when it premiered in syndication, and it was quite the event. I remember even back then as a younger person, a younger version of myself, let's say, being pretty psyched out of my mind about it, and my dad too, and it was an event. And I grew up watching The Next Generation. I feel like a lot of fans do, like I'm a part of that family, or they're a part of my family, right? I wanted to be on the Enterprise D. Anybody out there want to be on the Enterprise D? Maybe even right this very minute. I just thought it was so awesome. I loved the characters. I loved the crew. I loved the ship. I loved all the alien races they were encountering and the worlds they were encountering and all that stuff. It just captivated my imagination. And really, I equate that to I'm also captivated by Jesus. And of course, I was captivated by Jesus long before Star Trek captivated my attention. And as I grew older and as I began to watch more Star Trek and I began to understand some of its themes and what it was talking about and realizing it was way more than just a cool spaceship with cool people traveling through space, flying through space, encountering new civilizations and worlds and all those things. And it was way more than phasers and action and cool, sleek, sci-fi looking things, right? It had meat. It had something in it that was different, not than all other sci-fi, but it was very intentional in how it dealt with issues and how it handled tough topics, and especially topics of our day. But it set it in a futuristic science fiction setting so that we could actually look at things from a different perspective. And I want to encourage you today. That's one thing I really love about Jesus. Jesus came, and of course, as a Christian, I believe the Bible teaches that he was both fully man and fully God, which is this really hard concept to understand fully. I think we can say that we believe that, but to really truly understand it, I think that's far beyond what we can actually understand in our human brains and hearts. But Jesus came, and he showed us the world from a different perspective. He showed us how to love better. He showed us a better way to love. He showed us a better way to serve those around us, even our enemies, even the hardest people to love, which is most likely whoever our enemy is, put whoever that might be in that category. But sometimes it's our family. Sometimes it's our spouse. Sometimes it's our neighbor. Let's just be really real. Sometimes it's our kid. And oftentimes our kids feel the same way about us, right? Now, at the end of the day, hopefully that is just a momentary feeling. And of course, we give all that we have to our kids, to our spouse, to our family. We're committed. We're dedicated to them through thick and thin, right? Well, Jesus came and he said some very controversial things. He lived a very humble life, and yet we see in the New Testament, in the Gospels in particular, that thousands of people began to follow him. He had people come, throngs of people coming at him from every direction. And he taught about love. He taught about grace and mercy and compassion. He did talk about sin too. He did talk about a better way, the right way. And he did confront sin, and he did confront religious leaders, really more than any other group of people. He confronted religious leaders. He was not very political, all in all. He had moments where the political elite would interact with him, and he would have frank conversations with them. But really, his target and his aim for who he served, who he ministered to, who he wanted to be with, were the least among those. They were the poor. They were the crippled and the sick. They were the outcasts of society, right? And one of the things I love about Star Trek is I believe that Star Trek embodies, in a way, you could even say kind of this idealistic version of the American dream, that if you work hard, if you have a good attitude, if you're willing to serve those around you, think about the greater good of society and civilization and humanity and even other races and species and all other worlds, if you're willing to engage in this type of culture, you have a shot at having a successful life, right? You can rise and rank in Starfleet. You can do whatever you want to, especially if your aim is good, especially if you're thinking about more than yourself. And this is the idealistic thing that Star Trek always holds to. The Big Sci-Fi Podcast recently had Rod Roddenberry as a guest on our show, and he, of course, is the son of legendary Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek originally, was a major part of The Next Generation, and unfortunately passed away. But he talked about The Next Generation really being his dad's sweet spot. This was the fully realized version of the future that his dad wanted to see on television, where they tried to talk out their differences, where they worked together as a crew, where, yeah, they had flaws, they had they got it wrong from time to time, right? But in reality, everything worked towards, everyone helped each other come back to the main focus, the main point. This idea that really, if I can get honest, we're all created equally. And that is not just an American theme, although we can debate whether America has really lived this out. We certainly haven't, and continue to still struggle with that we're all created equally thing, right? But Jesus came into the world fully God, fully man, and lived this out, and he reached out to the people who really needed it the most. And he said some amazing things. He said, I did not come into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. He came into the world to show us our sin, but not to condemn us, to heal us, to save us. Right? That is so hopeful. That is something of the kingdom of God, even though the creators and the writers of Star Trek did not probably intend for it to be this way, or they would not link it to this. I see that in Star Trek. That's one thing I love about it. It's not just the characters or the futuristic aspect of it, the sci-fi, the ships, all those things. It is that as a Christian, as a believer in God, I can see things in this show that really get me pumped up, that I can say, yes, that is right. Yes, that is good. And as Christians, even if something is not innately Christian or faith-based or spiritual in nature, we ought to be able to celebrate and recognize when we see the kingdom of God showing itself in some manner around us. And we can use that to draw people into the goodness of God. We can show people around us, our neighbors, our coworkers, our classmates, even our family members who maybe don't believe in Jesus. We can say, hey, that's a really good thing. And do you know where I believe that goodness actually originated from? Jesus. And so when I watch Star Trek, I oftentimes look for these moments. And as a part of this podcast, we are going to actively be talking about those moments in Star Trek through all of the series. Everything is open for discussion on the Brian Donahue podcast as we talk about Star Trek and Jesus. We're going to talk about original series, Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, which, by the way, full disclosure, is my all-time favorite. I think Deep Space Nine is brilliant. It took a season or two to get there, like a lot of shows do, but I believe Deep Space Nine is still remains a gem in the Trek universe. And if I could only have one series on Blu-ray disc to have hard copies of for all eternity, it would be Deep Space Nine, hands down. Captain Sisko is my captain. I love the father-son thing going on with him and Jake Sisko. And it's just phenomenal. The Dominion War, phenomenal. The character development in that show, I believe, is unlike any other of the Trek series we have ever seen, even now today. I don't think any show has come close to developing characters like Deep Space Nine did. Just intriguing. And so we're going to talk about that stuff. We're going to talk about when characters made mistakes. We're going to live in a liminal space when it comes to Star Trek and being a Christian. Because there are a lot of things, if we're honest with ourselves, that do not line up with the Bible, that are not innately Christian, and sometimes not even good in various different ways. And so we're going to talk about that, just like we would any other movie, just like we would any political situation or news story of our day. We're going to have relevant discussions about this thing we loved so much, Star Trek. And we're going to have a blast doing it. We're going to have episodes where we feature particular episodes or a film, and we're going to just work our way through it and talk about it inside and out. We're going to geek out as fans about it. We might even have an occasional guest from Star Trek in some way, behind the scenes, or an actor on. And we're going to have a lot of fans on the show, too. One of my things I am most psyched out about these episodes of the Brian Donahue podcast is we're going to have a segment called Why the Heck Is This Your Favorite Episode? And we're going to have fans on to talk just for 10 or 15-minute segments about why they love a particular episode or film of Star Trek. And it's going to be basically 10 minutes of fame for these fans. And I say that tongue-in-cheek. I don't really mean that. But it's going to be a lot of fun hearing different voices. You may even hear somebody you know, a friend of yours, or another podcaster that you love from a different show other than the Big Sci-Fi Podcast who talks about Star Trek. Come on, these segments. We're going to have all kinds of hosts. We are going to have other podcasters on. We're going to have other pastors on, people of faith, and we're going to have you, the fans, on to talk about Trek and Jesus. It's going to be a lot of fun. And by the way, I just talked about what I'm psyched out of my mind for, one of the segments that's going to be a lot of fun. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the first ever Why the Heck Is This Your Favorite Episode? The portion of our show where we bring in one lucky fan to get their 10 minutes of fame discussing their most favorite Star Trek episode of all time. And without further ado, our special guest today is me, Pastor Brian. That's right. It's the first episode of the show, so I think it's only fair that I get the first shot at talking about what our all-time favorite episode is. This is a really hard question for any Star Trek fan. I think probably some would be able to just fire this off, no problem. I think for a lot of us, though, it really is a difficult question because there are so many great episodes, great films out there to pick from. And as Star Trek fans, we have a general love for all Star Trek, and there's so much to pick from. There's so much we could choose. Great episodes. We might have a particular favorite, but someone might list another favorite, and we go, oh, that is so fantastic. That is a great episode. Oh, I forgot about that episode. This is one thing I love about Star Trek, right? We have so much to pick from, such a catalog of shows and films. And ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned before that my favorite series is Deep Space Nine. And there are so many great episodes that I could pick from. But if I had to land on one, I think one of the most beautiful hours in all of science fiction occurred during the run of Deep Space Nine. I think they had several moments and hours like this on the show. But I think one of the most beautiful, heartbreaking episodes of Deep Space Nine and Star Trek in its entire history was a little episode called Far Beyond the Stars. You know, the one where Captain Sisko dreams that he is a science fiction writer back in the 40s and 50s, right? And there's all sorts of fun stuff in that. You get to see actors out of their alien makeup and out of character in different situations. So it was a lot of fun. But man, they really tackled the issue of racism, which is something that as a pastor, as a Christ follower, I find abhorrent. I find it amazing that we're still talking about racism in this day and age, that in a nation that claims to have dealt with racism, the Civil War, slavery, all that stuff, the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King Jr., we're still struggling. We still have racism of all kinds, of all people, back and forth, both directions in America. And so the fact that this show tackled it in such a beautiful and creative way, in a way that Star Trek hadn't in a little while. Now, Next Gen certainly had its episodes, Deep Space Nine too, but I feel like this episode really came head on strong with the issue of racism. And it was beautifully directed, beautifully acted by Avery Brooks. And it's powerful. I remember when it came out just being blown away. It actually spurred in me, and if you listen to the Big Sci-Fi podcast, you've heard this story at least a couple times, but it actually spurred in me. I was a young college student at the time, attending Malone College. Now it's Malone University in Canton, Ohio. But I was in a process of research class struggling to figure out what kind of research paper I would write. And so I went in and had a conversation with my professor, and she was just asking me all kinds of probing questions to get me thinking. And she said, "Well, what do you love? What do you love thinking about, researching, reading about?" And I said, I'm a Trekkie. I love Star Trek. And she said, "Ooh, that's good. Hasn't Star Trek dealt with all kinds of social issues through its whole entire run?" And she said, "Maybe you can research and write a paper about that." And I was like, holy crap, I get to be a Trekkie in college. It was an amazing experience. So there were actually now this is back in the late 90s, early 2000s, like the internet. I remember at Malone University, actually, my first time ever getting on the internet was in their computer lab in the library, and not knowing what the www was. Oh, that was, yes, kids, for those of you that there are people alive on the earth pre-internet, pre-cell phones. We lived in those days and the dark ages, right, of technology. But I digress. I remember writing this research paper, and there were actually educational papers. There were actually PhD level papers written, doctorates written about Star Trek and how it's dealt with racism and other social issues of our time. And so it was really engaging to me. And this episode, Far Beyond the Stars, really captured my imagination. I then began to go back to other Star Trek. It really opened my eyes to what science fiction could actually do, too. I'd seen documentaries, I'd heard about it, read about it, that Star Trek did this, and I loved that. But this is the first time as a young man I actually dove into it a little bit and began to really research and think about the issue of racism, especially in America, right? Because that's my context. And as a white man in America, my experience has been vastly different than my brothers and sisters who are African American or Asian or any other ethnicity other than white Caucasian, right? And so it just opened my eyes, and Deep Space Nine did that for me as a white man. It did that for me as a young man, and it did it for me even as a Christian. This is something that I will talk about from time to time. I just have a hard time with Christians who just don't want to deal with this issue in their life. Like, it's there, you have to deal with it. You have to work through it. As a believer in Jesus, as a follower in Jesus Christ, we have to handle sin. We have to live in that liminal space with ourselves in our own hearts and our minds, and we need to allow Jesus to renew our mind. We need to be constantly changing as Christians. That's what I believe the Bible teaches. I hate it when I hear even believers now say, because of age, because of how deeply rooted a belief system is, that they're just never going to change. I don't think that's true if you're a Christ follower. I think we have the Holy Spirit, and I think that we have been given the power, the authority, the ability, if we want to change our thoughts, to change our minds, to turn. What repent says is to turn the other direction, the opposite direction, and go a different way. I believe that is possible for every Christian. And so Far Beyond the Stars really helped me learn more about racism as I dove into it with this research project. And it also showed me how beautiful science fiction can be, truly, for helping us spend some moments, some time in those liminal spaces, those places of tension, to ask ourselves, is that me? Am I seeing myself? Which character am I? Have I ever reacted like that? Have I ever responded like that? Have I ever not done anything to respond when I see injustice happening? Have I remained silent? Have I ignored it? Or have I actually tried to be a part of the solution? Have I tried to shine the light of Jesus everywhere I go, to everyone I meet? Or am I just one of these kind of Sunday morning Christians? And I thank Far Beyond the Stars from Deep Space Nine for helping me think through this. And it's a beautiful episode. It's well-directed, superbly acted. The cinematography is gorgeous. The music is fantastic with all those jazzy themes. And it is a moment, in my opinion, one of the greatest hours in all of science fiction history. Not just Deep Space Nine, not just Star Trek, but I believe every science fiction fan who's really a fan who wants really good stuff should seek out this episode and watch it. And one day, here soon, I'm going to show it to my kids. I'm going to actually require that they watch this. My wife and I are very strong in teaching them that everybody is created equal. We're all made in the image of God. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. We don't like to use the term that we don't see color, because that would mean then we don't see beauty. We don't see creativity. We can't really understand or enjoy art. Like, God made us this beautiful mosaic. And that's another thing Star Trek does, is it shows us this beautiful mosaic of humanity. We're all different, but we can come together with the things that bind us together. And we can create a positive future. We can have hope for the future. Now, as a Christian, of course, I believe that hope ultimately comes in Jesus Christ. But I love that Star Trek talks about a positive future. This has been the first ever Why the Heck Do You Love This Episode? If you'd like to appear on the show, email me at pastorbriantd@gmail.com. You too can come on the show and have your 10 minutes of fame lived out in real life, talking about your favorite episode of Star Trek. So we're about to wrap up the first ever episode of the Brian Donahue Podcast, a podcast of Pursuit Friends online community of Jesus followers. I'd like to invite you into the community, and the best way to partake, to engage, to take off at warp speed. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. But the best way to truly engage with our community is to join us over on Discord. It's Pursuit Friends online community of Jesus followers. I've got invites everywhere, all over Facebook. You can find us on Facebook. You can find our page on Instagram, and also our YouTube page. Just look up Pursuit Friends online community, and you'll be able to see our weekly call to action. Every Monday, I issue a call to action, something that you can seek to do every day or a few times throughout the week to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to show forth the light of Jesus, to also live out your fandom in Trek, right? Nothing wrong with that. To say, hey, I'm working towards a better future, a hopeful future, and that future starts right here, right now, by how I treat those around me, how I serve those around me. So check that out. I also do usually about a weekly message, some sort of encouraging thing. That message tends to be mostly spiritual in nature. I might cover a Bible verse or a passage or a story from the Bible, but I'll also talk about Star Trek. On the Discord page, we have every single series listed, every single movie, and you can get in there and you can talk up all the Star Trek you want to. Very soon we're going to begin to engage as a community on the Discord with video events, with live feeds, all that kind of fun stuff. And so check that out. That's the best way to get involved in the community and become a part of what's happening day by day, to interact with each other around Star Trek and Jesus. We're having a blast already, those that have chosen to engage with that and partake in that. And I cannot wait to see you there at Pursue Friends Online Community of Jesus Followers Discord. So hit that like button, hit that share button. If you've enjoyed this podcast, invite your Star Trek friends, especially your fellow believers, into this as we continue to work at what it means to be a Star Trek fan and a Jesus follower. Love you guys, appreciate you. Keep on trekking, live long and prosper, and remember to boldly go into all the world with the hope and the light of Jesus. See you next time.